This is Equality and Justice Now, sponsored by Pennsylvania Now. I'm Caryn Hunt. I'm president of the Pennsylvania State Chapter of the National Organization for Women. Our subject tonight is second wave feminism. What is its legacy? What is its unfinished business? My guests tonight are Karen Bojar, who is a former president of Philadelphia Now, and also author of Feminism in Philadelphia, The Glory Years. And also Jocelyn Morris, who is a National Now board member and also the chair of the Now Task Force to End Racism. Thank you. Karen, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your book.
Sure.
Your book is Feminism in Philadelphia, and you characterize it as the glory years, and this is the second wave of feminism. So can you describe what is the second wave?
Okay. It's an experience that I missed. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book, I was really curious about the history that was occurring here in Philadelphia. I lived here, but I was not part of it. I thought I was too radical for Philadelphia Now. And I hung around with groups that thought of feminism as a petty bourgeois deviation. Would you believe?
No.
And I really regret that I missed all the fun. When I became president of Philadelphia Now, I met some of the founding members, I got to know them, and I realized that their history had not been told. I was a professor of women's studies at Community College of Philadelphia, and in that capacity, I did a whole lot of reading about the history of feminism, second wave feminism. Just about everything that has been written has been on the national level. And the feminist movement would never have been so successful if it were not for women like the women in this book who were working in towns and cities across the country to advance the feminist agenda. It would not have happened if it were just the national leaders. As I've given talks about the book, I often ask people, and I'm going to ask our audience, when you think of second wave feminism, what names come to mind? Who do you think of?
Gloria
come
Steinem.
on. Everyone says Gloria Steinem. That's the first name. Then there's a long pause, and then there's another name that usually comes up. Nobody says her. You're the only person who's ever mentioned her, and that's because you're connected to Now.
Betty Friedan.
Betty Friedan. Right. What always happens, Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, and then a blank. Occasionally Bella Abzug, and that's it. And the women, the feminist pioneers in Philadelphia Now deserve to be known. Philadelphia women should know about them, and that's why I wrote the book. I could not have written it without them. They were very generous with their time. They also gave me cartons of archival material, about 40 boxes, which have now been shipped to Temple Urban Archives. And this little book is the distillation of about 40 boxes of archival material.
Well, let me ask you though. You peg basically you cover the years 1968 to 1982. So how is that? How did you conceive of that era basically as the bookends for the second wave? And again, what really is the second wave?
Well, okay, that's essentially the social movement phase of the feminist movement. 1968 is usually by most social movement theorists considered the time when everything erupted. It was a really exciting time to have been alive.
So not just the feminist movement,
but in Philadelphia, that was when Philadelphia Now was founded in 1968.
Okay.
And 1982, well, we all know what happened in 1982. Very sad.
No, we don't all know.
Well, I think some of us do.
Well,
something went down to defeat the Equal Rights Amendment. And I know you want to talk about that a little later, but when I did the research for the book and I found out how much these women put into the struggle, they gave up their jobs. Lillian Cherokee, I was so hoping that she might come today, and maybe she still will, was on the fast track, a high-powered corporate career. That's what she was headed for. She gave up that job to work as a volunteer for 2 years in Florida to try to get the Florida legislature to ratify the ERA. So there were women who just put their lives on hold, gave up everything, worked so hard. How could it have failed? Maybe you might want to get back to that. I'm kind of getting ahead of the game.
But so that's what you're sort of conceiving as the end of the second wave.
Bookends, correct.
Now, but why is it the second wave and not the first wave?
Oh, okay. Well, this is actually getting very controversial among feminist historians. The first wave refers to the suffragist movement, the attempt to get the vote for women, a long struggle which finally culminated in 1920 with the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Okay. There are many historians now, particularly women of color, who are questioning the whole wave schema. They feel that describing feminism in terms of a first wave, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and a second wave, Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, obscures much of the feminist work of women of color, not just women of color, labor feminists, whose work does not neatly fit into the wave schema.
Okay.
However,
but basically, wave being a surge of activism on behalf of feminist rights, and okay.
Exactly. And so there is some logic to using the wave schema, because there was quite an upsurge around the struggle for the right to vote, and there was certainly an explosion in the 1960s.
Okay. Joyce, let me ask you some questions. Let me ask you, how did you first get involved with feminist issues, and how did you particularly get involved with now?
Well, first of all, you have to include Flo Kennedy in this description of minority women. Her book was
leaders of the second wave.
Right, the second wave. She wrote her book, Color Me Flo, and I love that book. How I got involved is I was raised in the Baptist church, and I noticed that God only spoke to men. And for some reason, that just didn't sit real well with me. And that was where I started to, read and not believe everything I read. So that was the push. And then I got a job at the YWCA in Kensington, working with teen mothers. And from that, I got exposed to now. This is like 78. And then I came and I joined the Philadelphia Now chapter.
Okay.
And here I am.
Okay. I've been reading a lot about the civil rights movement and the human rights movement, basically. The human rights movement, the civil rights movement, and then the feminist movement, which really came after that. So it seems to me that there's some continuity between these movements.
Right.
Well,
what happened is I went to the Philadelphia Now meetings down on Chestnut Street, and I would walk in and there would maybe be one other minority woman, and mostly black. I didn't see any other nationalities. So I continued to go, and I'd watch my news channel, and our government would always ask for somebody from Now to speak for all the women in the country.
Yes.
So that kind of pissed me off.
Sure.
And so I said, well, let me get more involved in this organization, find out what it's doing, and make sure my 2 cents as a minority woman is included in what they say. So that's what I did. And then as part of that process, there was a little tension between the women in Now, which were mostly white, and me saying, I'm not going to just work on gender feminist issues. I have racism I deal with also. Is that?
I was surprised, I guess, Karen, I was surprised that a prime behind the scenes founder of the original Philadelphia Now was Ernesta Drinker Ballard, who is a prominent Republican socialite. Not the kind of person that I would think would be involved in this issue or in feminist issues and grassroots activism. Was this typical of second wave feminism?
No,
okay.
I was surprised too.
Okay.
And I'm really glad that I met Ernesta Ballard at a time in my life when I could appreciate the committed feminist, the impassioned feminist that she was. If I had met her earlier in my life, I would have seen a rich Republican woman, and I don't know whether I would have been able to get beyond that. She was totally devoted to the feminist cause. Now, Ernesta came from an elite mainline background. So the only oppression that she felt was gender oppression. She was not oppressed in terms of race or class, but she was born in 1920. And despite coming from a very affluent family, her family did not want her to go to college. Ernesta never went to college.
I didn't know that. This is the woman who started the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society and the flower show.
Right. She gave herself an education. She became a very successful businesswoman. But her family did not encourage that. She married when she was very young. She told an Inquirer reporter that she had wanted to be a lawyer, but her family never encouraged that. And women from her class, her background, didn't just get up and leave and say, okay, I'm going to law school. So she got married, put her ambitions on hold. When the feminist movement emerged, she was really ready for that. Betty Friedan contacted her. Betty Friedan was looking for rich, well-connected women.
And Betty Friedan is basically the primary founder of Now.
Correct. And she was very concerned that Now at that time be a very respectable movement. One thing I uncovered in writing this book, I couldn't believe it. Susan Brown Miller, some of you might be familiar with her. She wrote a really groundbreaking study of rape and sexual violence against women. She, in the early 60s, wanted to join Now. So she wrote a letter to Betty Friedan, and she said, I've had all this experience in the civil rights movement, and I really want to work on feminist issues. And Betty Friedan never replied to her, and at some point did get back to her after Susan Brown Miller pursued it and said, Now is a select organization of professional women who will be lobbying Congress. So her original conception was that it should be a group of elite women. However, the women of the country were ready for the feminist message. And in spite of her, it mushroomed and chapters developed all over the country. And it became a bigger, broader, more diverse movement than she ever imagined. And she began to grow and develop and change, as we all do.
And that's a very good thing. Let me ask you, going back to how you first became involved with Philadelphia Now. What were the issues that Philadelphia Now was involved with when you became involved? And I mean, did you know that Ernesta Drinker Ballard was one of the founders?
No, not really.
Okay.
The primary one was the ERA.
Okay.
I actually flew with the chapter to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And we just almost rocked the plane because there was a woman pilot. So that was just too awesome. But then going back to the Philadelphia Now chapter, what happened is I couldn't get the women. I was trying to recruit minorities to go to Center City to the chapter meetings and the plan, different actions and whatever. And I couldn't get the women from the Now chapter to come to where all of my people were that I was recruiting. So what I ended up doing is I made contact with the Germantown YWCA on Germantown Avenue, talked to the director, and we decided to convene the Germantown chapter there. And that's
so
what
you
I
founded the Germantown Now chapter.
Right.
Okay.
But the good part of the story that I love is the Ebony magazine had this cartoon in it, and it showed a man sitting in his easy chair in the living room watching television. His son is standing by his knee, and the wife is bringing him a beer. And the little boy says, "Mommy, is this the picture of the day Daddy, Mommy, is this the picture of the day Mommy came to work for us?" And I took that picture with me to Germantown Avenue and whatever that big cross street, I don't even remember now. And I used that as a recruitment tool for minority women. And this is a black family in the picture. And
it works for...
Yeah, it worked. It worked because we had, I don't know, 30 or 40 women and men join our chapter during that period of like 3 years.
Let me ask you, can you, because we are familiar with some of the conditions of life in the 60s and early 70s in this country. But a lot of our viewers and audience are not familiar with it. I mean, it's, certainly sexism and racism still exist, but, for instance, there used to be separate ads for men and women for want ads. So can you sort of, tell our audience a little bit about what it was like, what the challenge was when you were coming of age?
Well, I think my generation and myself, I'm a little bit past a lot of the racism that was happening. I've never seen a sign where it says blacks only or whites only.
Like with segregation.
And by the time I was looking for a job after high school and I did a little bit of college, it wasn't what I knew to be as bad. Like you're saying, I don't even remember seeing the want ads with women and men on it.
They were there.
Well,
you're my age. They were there.
I wasn't paying attention then.
Well, no, I mean everyone gets consciousness.
Yeah, I hadn't had my consciousness raising meeting, so I wasn't there.
Yeah, I accepted it. When I was looking for a job as a young woman, I opened the Bulletin or the Inquirer, remember the Bulletin? And
yes.
Help wanted female, and I said, okay, jobs for women, and it never occurred to me that there was anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
I didn't.
And yet, you see a cartoon like that, and I mean, that's like I hear that, and I think, oh no,
no,
that's very activating.
Yeah.
And like when I read about I never had read before that there was actually a separate parade to the 1963 March on Washington for women. That there were actually two different parades, one for men civil rights leaders and one for women's civil rights leaders. And then of course they didn't have a chance to speak or anything like that. I mean, people don't even know that.
But
history.
Not to beat up too much on the civil rights leaders, because
the
whole society is so
the press,
sexist,
frankly.
And there's no way we could have expected them to be any better than any other men. And it is ironic that in the 1963 Civil Rights March, there was gender segregation.
It is ironic, and well, it's in the past, and that's a good thing. Well, let me ask you for a war story, just maybe a short war story.
Well, I've got one. Do you want to go first?
No.
There's so much that I learned by doing this research. I never knew about your Germantown Now chapter until I did the research for this.
And I mailed you all
the
this
records of it had just totally disappeared. So now it's all here in chapter 6.
Oh, wow.
No, I had no idea. But when I started doing the research, I slowly began to get a few clues, which led me to Joyce. But anyway, the war story. This, I think, is really interesting because there's a larger thread here. The Socialist Workers' Party, on the national level, targeted the feminist movement. It's been documented. Political science Joe Freeman has documented this. This was how they were going to get new recruits to the SWP. And they had their members infiltrating Now chapters all over the country. There was a Socialist Workers' Party contingent here in Philadelphia. And it created a lot of problems. Despite all of the research and interviewing all of these people, I've never been able to disentangle whether the threatened dissolution of the chapter in 1977, it almost fell apart, was caused by the Socialist Workers' Party, which some contend, or volunteer burnout, which others contend, or both, which is most likely.
Yeah.
But what was happening, and here's the bigger story, the New Left was disintegrating in the middle and late 70s. There were women who were looking for a place to go. So you had women coming into now who had come out of socialist organizations, and they were bringing a different perspective to now. Now, members, in fact, some still maintain, it doesn't matter what your political allegiance is. You can be a Republican, you can be a Democrat, you can be a Green, a socialist. You can still be a feminist. Well, yes and no. If you want a feminist movement which does provide for the basic needs of all women, can you do it with our low-tax, unregulated form of capitalism? That was their ideological challenge.
This is Equality and Justice Now. Stay tuned. Let me ask you, Joyce, for a war story from Germantown nowadays.
Well, I got hired as the project manager of the YWCA Girls Coalition Project, which was teenage women between 13 and 19 years old.
Wow.
Who had given birth and dropped out of school. So what I found out is about 50% of the girls did not know how they got pregnant. And one, I'm serious. They thought if they had, can I go there? I'll go there, you can cut it.
Why me? You tell your story, because I think it's very important that this.
They thought if they douched after having sex, they wouldn't get pregnant. One girl told me that she wouldn't get pregnant because she had sex standing up. And it just went downhill from there. So one of the things that I tried to do, I tried to get the girls to get a GED so that they could go on with their lives. We also channeled them into non-traditional jobs. And I had the worst fight with my mother because she said women should not work for the telephone company and climb telephone poles.
No, wait, I'm sorry. How does that, and that's not.
And that would mean they would make enough money to help take care of this child that they produced. And also the other thing that got me really involved in now is there's a quote that a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. So, Gloria Steinem. So what I tried to teach them is that you're a woman, whether you have a man at your side or in your bed, or if you have a baby or not. It's okay not to reproduce if you're not going to be a
You're a person, mother. In other words.
Yeah, you're
a person, and you're entitled to
and you
life and rights.
Right, live that life without those boundaries that society puts on you. So that's one war story. I have many more.
No, well, how long did you work at the?
It was a 2-year job, and then I just.
Was it difficult in your community to bring awareness of birth control and?
I was completely out of my element.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I was working in Kensington, Philadelphia portion of Kensington, and it was mostly a Hispanic community, but there were black girls and other ethnic groups and other whites also.
Well, I know it's difficult even now to, you can't just place a Planned Parenthood in South Philadelphia. I mean, you get pushback from your community if you want to talk, even today in 2014, you get pushback if you want to talk about birth control.
Right. Well,
you get pushback if you want to talk about it in school in terms of sex education. It's not required in Pennsylvania to teach it. So.
But the only other thing I wanted to mention is some of these girls, this was like 2nd Street in like past Girard Avenue, I guess. I'm not even remembering the street now. But they had never been downtown to Market Street. They had never been over to Broad Street. That little area that they lived in was their whole world, and they didn't get exposed to anything else. And so they grew up thinking that they had to follow the model of the community and have babies and get married, and that was their life. So.
Okay, let me, Karen, let me ask you something about. Let me ask you about Betty Friedan. Actually, she called the lesbian movement the Lavender Menace. Why did she feel such a threat from the lesbian movement to the feminist
First of
movement?
all, the good news is that attitude was largely confined to Betty Friedan. And unfortunately, the national media glommed onto that, and there are many people who think of now as homophobic because of that. And when I did this research about
because of something said literally almost 50 years ago?
She really did have her issues. And there's a lot of controversy about the extent to which she was homophobic, the extent to which she was so afraid that now would not have the respectable image which was so important to her. She had a real thing about scruffy feminist. And there's an interesting anecdote here.
What's a scruffy feminist?
She appeared on a television show with Roxanne Dunbar, who was a lesbian feminist activist, and who was wearing, she said, her very best white man shirt and sailor trousers, and she thought she looked terrific. But Betty Friedan viewed her as a scruffy feminist and attacked her for, according to Roxanne Dunbar, this is Roxanne Dunbar's recollection of this, which is actually reinforced by our very own Betty Parzial, who also got a negative reaction from Betty Friedan, because Betty Friedan wanted people wearing, white gloves and little hats.
No kidding, really?
Really. But remember, this is the
That is not what I think of when I think of feminist movement.
No, she came from a fairly privileged background, and to be fair to her, this was a very sexist society. She wanted the men who led institutions, who were the movers and shakers in society, to take her movement seriously. And she thought that she had to pull together a movement of elite women to do that. However, we later found out that if you get a whole bunch of people from the grassroots pushing from the ground up, you can really accomplish a lot. She evolved. By 1977, she had repudiated her former homophobia, and like many people in this society, her attitudes toward homosexuality have evolved. We all know people, and I'm sure maybe many of us at one time had some negative attitudes that we've kind of gotten beyond, and she got beyond them as well.
I think that's laudable.
But in the late 60s, she did in fact refer to lesbians as the Lavender Menace.
Well, and then lesbians would come out to rallies and with T-shirts that said Lavender Menace, which was hilarious, I thought. So, and now LGBT rights is one of the 6 core missions of NOW.
And can I say one more thing?
Sure,
about it?
absolutely.
One thing I learned, and I didn't know this until I did the research. We tend to think of Philadelphia as kind of behind New York and the West Coast, but Philadelphia was certainly ahead of the game in lesbian rights. It was the first NOW chapter to elect an open lesbian as president, a really wonderful woman named Jan Welsh. And this actually brings me to another sort of sad part about this book. I kept missing opportunities to interview people because they died. We had a follow-up interview scheduled with Ernesta Ballard, and we were so looking forward to that because we were so impressed with her. She had a stroke and died a few months later, no follow-up interview. I met Jan Welsh in 2008 when I wasn't really ready to focus on the book. And she said, when you're ready, let me know, we'll have a follow-up interview. A year later, she died of pancreatic cancer. And the point that I'm making is that many of our founding mothers are not going to be with us much longer. And I am hoping that this book encourages people to document our history, to get it down while the feminist pioneers are still here.
I think that you're right, and one thing that your book really pointed out to me is it is the individual boots on the ground, the leaders in the communities that we really need to know more about, because they're our heroes. They really are. This is Equality and Justice Now. You're watching Philly Cam. Stay tuned. Now, one of the things that attracted me to Now is Now's 6 core missions: economic justice, reproductive justice, LGBT rights or gender equity, combating racism, ending violence against women, and constitutional equality, or the Equal Rights Amendment. Joyce, can we talk a little bit about Now's perspective on, why so many missions for a feminist organization?
Because someone has to work on all of them for women. And Now is doing that. As Karen was saying earlier, the civil rights movement was only interested in getting rights for the men and left minority women out of voting and everything else as far as equality is. So Now was the organization that elected to try to fix it for all of us.
So now, was Now involved specifically with getting women employed at AT&T? Am I correct about that? Okay, I thought I was, because you brought up women working in non-traditional jobs.
Oh,
and,
yeah. Yeah.
So maybe you could speak to that a little, because I don't actually know a whole lot about that.
Well, it was a national case, and Lois Herr was instrumental in that. Let's see if I can remember the facts. It's all in this book, but not in a little bit of background about it. That's the national story, and I've tried to interweave the national story with the local story.
But for instance, it's a good example of where Now gets to the heart of the matter. Right?
And also, many people have the stereotype that Now only cares about opportunities for elite women. But when you look at the historical record, the beneficiaries of the AT&T case were, for the most part, working class women.
So what was the case?
Well, there was a woman named, it's coming back to me, Lorena Weeks.
There you go.
She wanted to be a switch operator, and only men had that job. And she went to court. She didn't have much luck until she finally hooked up with Now, and the Now lawyer took the case. It is starting to come back to me. Supposedly, women could not have these well-paying blue-collar jobs because you had to be able to lift 30 pounds, and women could not do that. The Now lawyer, her name was Sylvia Roberts, I think, if my fading memory is correct here. A little tiny woman just picked up some 30 pounds worth of stuff and carried it around casually and totally demolished that argument. And the judge who ruled in the case put it extremely well, and I wish I could remember exactly how he said it. Something like, men have always had the right to decide if difficult physical work, dirty, possibly dangerous work, was worth the candle, worth higher pay. Women have been barred from that, and now we want women to be able to make that decision. Is it worth it to do this harder work for better pay? So she got the job. There was a backlash. She was called terrible names on the job, but eventually things settled down, and slowly, male workers began to accept the fact that women could do this kind of work.
And now we even have the Pentagon accepting that women who are in combat zones should get equal pay.
And Philadelphia Now's contribution to helping women gain access to non-traditional blue-collar jobs was integrating the police department. Now it seems perfectly normal to us to see women walking around with their guns, and I still get a little chill when I see that in a way. Whoever's walking around with a gun.
Oh, okay.
But there was incredible sexism in the police department. Those of you who were around then remember Police Commissioner Rizzo, followed by Police Commissioner O'Neill. They fought tooth and nail to keep women out of the police department. A courageous woman. And there always has to be somebody who is willing to be the first person to fight. Her name was Penelope Brace. Her story is in this book. I really wanted to get an interview with her. I finally tracked her down and found out she had just died. I mean, this is a familiar story. It keeps happening throughout this.
Well, but tell us the story that you did.
She was very courageous, although she needed help. When she first filed the suit, according to Lillian Cherokee and some of the people who told me the story, she was very nervous, afraid to do it. Now, she was a NOW member, NOW bucked her up. She had the support of her NOW sisters. She went through this. The treatment, and actually what really got to me were the petty cruelties, the little things. O'Neill refused to order uniforms that were made for the female body. And the police officers were told they just should wear as many undershirts as possible to suppress their breast. And it wasn't until Morton Solomon, I know, it's totally crazy. Does anybody remember Morton Solomon? He was a good guy. He became police commissioner in 1980. Finally, the lawsuit was settled. And he ordered, and again, the little details can be so telling, he ordered uniforms specifically made for the female body. But it was quite a battle, and I'm in awe of people like Penelope Brace, who could put up with this incredible abuse. And I'm sure there's still some of this going on. But now there's a different culture. It's not tolerated at the top the way it was during the years of Commissioner Rizzo and Commissioner O'Neill. And now has something to do with that. But the real hero here was Penelope Brace.
Good story.
It is. It's in chapter 4. She's in chapter 6.
Let me ask you, Joyce, in your work with National Now, I know the term intersectionality comes up a lot, and this is, in conjunction with looking at basically the intersection of all these different perspectives that conspire to oppress women. Can you talk about intersectionality? I know it's a little bit of a difficult subject, but
it's a word that academia made up.
Sure.
I
Okay.
think. But,
it's an ugly word.
Yeah, it's a pain. But
okay,
anyway,
well, give me a better word.
But it's useful.
Okay.
What I think it means is that all of these issues, you can't say, oh, I'm hearing him over there. You can't just say, I'm being discriminated against because I'm black. I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman. I had a button from the 1960s that said triple minority, black, female, and lesbian. Okay, that's a triple minority. If you put ageism along with that, or classism, or religious intolerance, all of those things one person can have to deal with in their life. And that's what I think it means. But when you look at a person, you accept them for what you learn from them. You don't judge them just because they look like they're Muslim or black or whatever. You find out who they are inside.
As a person.
Yeah, as a person. So that's what I think it means. Intersectionality is too long to spell, and
no, that's fine.
That's
fine. I just hear what happens is
we'll make up another.
We do need another word. I completely agree. But there's so many advocate groups for feminist issues that are just reproductive rights or maybe labor rights, or whereas now focuses on. Better word he needed here, but focuses on all of the multi-issue. It's a multi-issue organization that focuses on everything that concerns women getting to equal status in terms of our politics and also our equal political status, equal economic status, equal social status, which is something I really admire about now. I mean, the that's really what brought me to now, as an adult anyway, was the idea that these 6 core missions, they're all meaningful and they're all important. And interestingly enough, back in the second, during the second wave, they were radical ideas, but today they just seem like, well, that's normal. That's what we want. That's right. That's what's right, So this is Equality and Justice Now. Stay tuned. Joyce, my next question is how does now economic justice is a very important core mission for the National Now. How does Now advocate for working women?
Well, one of the main things, and we've seen this like we're deja vu, we're repeating history. If you restrict a woman's right to an abortion, she has no way to control the size of her family. If she's working, she takes time off from work. She has to find childcare, which is, like I mentioned earlier, $1,000 for 2 kids under school age. And if that doesn't happen, then her parents, who are now retired, have to babysit. So their retirement is through because they're taking care of a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So that was one of the reasons that Now got the reputation that we're only working on abortion rights. Because abortion or not affects a large percentage of a woman's life.
And access to family planning. I mean, just being able to decide all those things.
Right.
But there again is the I want to think of a different word, but the intersection is the word of economic and reproductive justice. But let's continue on.
And the other thing, which is international, we're having a lot of young women in other countries getting married at 12 years old and having babies, and their bodies are not ready for it. Now has a global feminist task force that's working with other countries on that issue. Because this girl, the baby that she produces at 12, is not necessarily going to be healthy physically or mentally.
And there's did you ever see The Girl Effect? It's just the idea that if a girl, if you invest in women and girls in their community, and they are allowed to, get an education, not have children while they're still children themselves, then you're actually investing in their community that way. I mean, that is the girl effect, is like allow them to grow up and to have an education and to become,
a productive member of society.
A productive member of and autonomous member also of their community. Then that benefits the entire community. Can you? Go ahead.
I think that Philadelphia Now is a really good model for National Now. We work very closely with the Coalition for Labor Union Women, so we focus on working women's issues. And I think the feminist movement has been very successful in advancing the cause of relatively privileged women who have the kind of education which allows them to take advantage of opportunities. True, there's a glass ceiling. It's still there. But as Hillary Clinton famously said, there are 18,000 cracks in that glass ceiling. However, the real problem is there are a lot of women who are stuck on that sticky floor. And the hope there is, I think, through a revitalized labor movement. And we have been working on that in Philly, a little less so in National. Then I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more connection with National Now.
Can you talk just briefly a little bit about the benefits to women of belonging to a labor union for the benefit of this is something that we kind of know about because we work in it, but a lot of people don't normally see it.
Well, historically, of course, right now this is a tough time for labor. But historically, this collective bargaining has meant, just on this very basic level, higher salaries than benefits. And women who are much more likely to be in the low-wage service sector of the economy are the ones who most need collective bargaining. Now under Eleanor Smeal in the late 70s started to move more in the direction of ties with organized labor. I think we need to get back to that. There are more women who are rising in the labor movement. It's not your father's labor movement. And I do think that what happens with organized labor probably will make much more of a difference in the lives of most American women than what happens among the business elite. So,
I'd like to open this up for some questions from our audience, and we have the current president of Philadelphia Now, Nina Ahmad. Let's hear your question.
So my question is about the six basic issues that Now is dealing with. How do we integrate the access of immigrant women who are in this country now? The immigration now is 35% of immigrants are women, and it's growing. So that used to be much lower earlier. Sorry, excuse me. It was used to be 35, and now it's 51.
Wow.
I'm sorry. And so I think we have to think about women who are coming to this country who are bearing the brunt of settling their families and having to negotiate a new landscape.
Absolutely.
And if you have limited English capability, that makes it so much more harder. Those are really women who we as an organization should be reaching out to and talking about intersectionality. That's where we really need to see those intersections, because those women understand all the issues we're talking about, and they need to connect with a group that is able to advocate for them. So I think we need to really broaden our mission to be deliberate about including women who are, they're all women still, and in this country, and how do we make sure they have a voice and we're hearing their concerns.
And my understanding is that this is a very important issue to National Now.
They're starting to focus on it.
Right.
I'll just say something. Our national president got arrested last year.
That's right.
At the march that they had for immigration at the White House. Poor thing, that was her first time getting arrested ever. And she was in prison like 23 or 22 hours. But she went there because of the immigration issue.
So that's great. Now we actually have to put it into action of how Now operates. And one of those things is language access. So if we are deliberate about this, we could signal to that population of women that we really are trying to reach out to you by having capability to reach out to them.
No, you're absolutely right.
And that would be something that I would recommend National Now, and we are going to do that locally in Philadelphia. Right now in the room, we have folks here who come from diverse backgrounds with diverse languages as their language of origin. And so we already have that in Philadelphia, who are able to do both. They can speak English and their native tongue. So we already have built into Now this resource. So we should now try to make that, organize that, and make that in a way that we are deliberate and tell the world we are doing this. And I think you're going to see Now be much more relevant if we do that, not just here, worldwide, because right now we're on a global stage.
Right. So. I think I think you're right, Nina. I think you're,
all right.
I think we're lucky to have you too. So. I'd like to just talk about maybe domestic violence, just briefly, because it is one of our core missions and we haven't touched on it yet.
I can.
Go right ahead.
Okay, we just got an email from Terry O'Neill, who's the president of Now, about Marissa Alexander from Florida, who got 20 years in prison for shooting in the ceiling a warning shot for her husband, who had a restraining order and should not have been in her house in the first place.
So this is in Florida.
This is Florida.
This is a woman who fired a warning shot, not even at the man, fired a warning shot
into the ceiling
in her own home.
In her home.
When someone was there who was not even supposed to be there, and she just received 20 years in prison, while George Zimmerman who was threatened by the idea that someone might possibly have a gun in public, and who he had to get in his face to begin with, you know, got off scot-free in the same stand your ground state.
Okay, so
Outrageous.
My thing is, I think now had a lot to do with getting her out. She's already served 2 years or 3, whatever it is. And so Al Sharpton and a lot of other people, along with Terry and now, and just shooting emails out to everybody. They want the, what's her name, the prosecutor, Angela Corey, taken out as a prosecutor in Florida. So they're petitioning the governor of Florida to fire her. She should have been fired when Zimmerman walked free, but she did Marissa before Zimmerman. And now this third one with Dunn, she's, you know, that's 2 black boys, 17, have been murdered and nobody's in jail. And then this girl was defending herself and her child from
in a way that didn't kill anyone, and she's serving time in jail.
Husband. And Corey, the prosecutor, is now trying to make her serve 3 consecutive life sentences of 20-year sentences if she goes back to trial. So, you know, that's just something that just makes my hair burst into flame.
The system. I bet.
You know, it's unbelievable.
The second wave, you know, basically got kick-started around the issue of abortion, or I would say anyway, ignited and went big around the Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade, which made abortion legal in this country. Why is the Roe decision so important to feminists and to feminists sort of traditionally? And then I'd also like to get into some of the threats to Roe today.
Which you want me to, or if you want to? It's a basic human right to control your own body. I mean, that's really all I have to say. That's all that needs to be said.
Well, okay, but I mean that seems like a no-brainer to you and to Joyce and to me, but and maybe there are, I think, obviously a lot of younger women who believe that they have that right. I mean, they do have it constitutionally, but there are a lot of threats.
The right has been very clever. It has this state-by-state strategy, chipping away at abortion rights. And there's an article in The Nation a couple weeks ago about something that I had never heard of before, TED Talks.
You never heard of TED Talks?
Just like I never heard of 3D computers.
Okay.
Well, anyway, there are TED women. And women pay $7,000 to attend these events. And Jessica Valenti made the point that there was no mention of abortion. And so there are feminists, women who consider themselves feminist and are in many ways, who really feel we've gotten beyond that. And it is true for women with resources. Getting an abortion is not a problem. All of these restrictions are hitting low-income women, rural women, young women. These are the ones who are being deprived of the right to control their own bodies.
Well, and I think basically it's just a non-awareness of the threats, that there are organized threats to reverse Roe. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
But there are many women who know that they personally will not be threatened. This is why I think we're not having a real uprising here. I mean, there's a real class dimension to this.
There totally is.
The people who are suffering from the restrictions are, for the most part, low-income women, rural women, young women.
Minority women.
And minority women who certainly are disproportionately represented among low-income women. And there is this fear. You see it in legislators who are willing to advance women's health issues, but let's not talk about abortion as part of that agenda, which drives me crazy.
It drives me crazy too, as if it's something completely separate from reproductive health.
Abortion is a health issue.
It is
it's a women's health issue.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very.
One of the things I think is interesting, if they don't want women to have abortions, They want them to give birth to all the babies that they conceive. Then they don't want women to have to go on welfare to support these babies that they can't afford in the first place. And the fourth and most striking thing to me is they're concerned about the minority population overtaking the white race, okay? If you're making all of these minority women have more babies because you don't want them to abort them, hello, you don't get a clue. You're creating more minority babies that are going to overtake the white population in the United States and globally.
I think it's
crazy.
It is crazy.
They are all crazy. But that's my personal opinion. I'm sorry.
No, your opinion is welcome here.
And I'm sure we have some folks here who have some opinions they might like to.
Don't get me started. Introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is
sorry.
Casey Morris, and I'm a member of NOW in Missouri. My question is to the National Board, what are you doing to increase your membership with the younger minorities and men? Also, what are you doing to educate the people about white privilege?
Is he directing that to me?
I think so. I got that impression.
That was mean.
Well, it's to National now, so.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I've been encouraging them to do is to do family memberships. If there's 5,000 women in Philadelphia that are now members, then each one join spouse, loved one, nephew, niece.
It's a great idea.
What I did in my family, I gave my husband his NOW membership. Where were we, in Boston? In Boston for Father's Day. How sweet is that?
You know, that's brilliant because all the advocacy organizations are always doing stuff for Mother's Day.
Right, so I gave him his NOW
Right.
membership for Father's Day, and my son, who's now 18, he's had his NOW membership since he was 16, and he shows it to all the girls in school.
Oh.
So he just thinks that's the greatest thing.
I always think that it's important. One of NOW's very important missions is to is to talk to boys and men about about domestic violence, is sort of what comes to mind, but also about workers' rights, and because these are actually family, and even reproductive rights, these are actually family issues. So
I know you have been talking a lot about abortion, but I think it's bigger than that. The threats I see, manipulating the definition of abortion so that it will include certain kinds of birth control, for instance.
Oh, absolutely.
And then not funding birth control. There's a threat that it won't be included in Obamacare, and it's, what's that about? Could you address that?
I mean, it is crazy. At bottom, I mean, when you dig down underneath everything, it just comes up crazy. But what it comes down to is who's in control of women's bodies.
And they're digging their own grave.
Yeah.
I mean, these Republicans.
Because no one's going back to no birth control. 99% of all women use birth control at some point in their life, and no one's giving that up. It's not happening, and it's just not even. It's. And I do believe that the tide is turning, but it only turns when more people, women and men, get involved in this movement. So.
And when people pay more attention to voting, the reason that we have all these restrictions on the state level, so many people don't bother to vote in midterm elections. If the people who came out in presidential elections and elected Obama came out and voted in state elections, it would make a difference in Pennsylvania. Now, there are some states in which it probably wouldn't, because everybody is pretty far gone on these issues. But in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is a largely blue state, and Obama won decisively both times, but his voters did not come out in the off-year election. Hence, we have a Republican legislature which has introduced all of these restrictions on clinics.
They're targeted, they're called trap laws. They're targeted regulation of abortion providers. That's exactly what they are.
To put them out of business, to have building codes which would be appropriate for a facility which did major surgery, but certainly should not be required of an abortion facility.
Ridiculous regulation.
And that would not happen in Pennsylvania if the people who came out in presidential years came out in 2010 and come out in 2014.
I have to say thank you to you, Karen, and thank you to you, Joyce. You've been watching Equality and Justice Now on PhillyCam. Thanks for watching.